just to the right of the moon and straight on till morning. When I was president of these people, you do an acid trip where you go to this blue star out there in their made-up constellations. And that's where you get to meet their gods, their white supremacist gods, because they're white supremacist gods. I might cover that in another video, but this video is about Peter Pan. And to understand Peter Pan, you got to understand how emotionally stunted people think. So there's a kid with a stomach ache. The kid on the right of him asks him what's wrong. The kid on the left punches him. The kid on the right asks him what's wrong because they have empathy or sympathy. The kid that punches him doesn't have those, but he knows how to solve the problem. You make me feel uncomfortable, I hurt you. That's how that works. This is how a narcissist and emotionally stunted person behaves. The problem is when you look at that, you don't go, that's not, as an intelligent person, that doesn't solve anything. Well, it does. The emotionally stunted person now doesn't have to worry about that guy complaining about his stomach. Problem solved. You gotta understand what they're trying to solve. And it's mostly an inconvenience for them. Once again, emotionally stunted people only think about themselves. So, in the story of Peter Pan, he goes and collects Wendy, because what happens with Peter Pan is he got shut out of his house, he was abandoned as a kid, and he felt lost and alone. Yep. And when you do that to somebody, they grow up to be insecure. Yes, your parents represent a type of security for you. As a kid, I distinctly remember as being a tiny human coming up to probably just above my mother and father's kneecaps and being like, look at these giant things. They'll protect me no matter what. And that is where that security comes from. When you're abandoned or raped as a kid, you come up with an insecure relationship, an insecure style. You are insecure. That is not a debate. And what comes with insecurity is control issues. And with control issues comes the need to do everything through force. Everything is through force with these people in this church. Everything. It is not even coercion. That's the other thing, is coercion, but that's learned later. These people are like, if you learned all the wrong lessons in life, like, so, force and coercion. Now, how does this relate to Peter Pan? On the island of the Never Never Land, when he brings Wendy, basically he finds Wendy, sees her being kind and loving to her family, and gets envious or jealous of that. He decides he wants that for himself, so he takes it. I'm gonna take it. That's mine. Unfortunately, that's not how love works. Anyways, what these people end up in is an enmeshment, because emotions go both ways. You have to actually be able to connect with somebody to get love, okay? You don't get to be a fucking reptile. And that is what these people, they survive in the trauma brain, so they're constantly terrified. Peter does everything at the edge of a sword. It talks about in the original novel, he sees a pirate just being a pirate and he dispatches him for fun because kids are joyful and cruel. Which is why this church is cruel. And they do LSD, which makes them joyful. Now, Peter, to keep the other Lost Boys in line, threatens to kill everybody. And when he talks to them, he always aims his sword at them. He always aims his sword at them to let them know, basically, I'm in charge, I'm in control. And this is the thing with emotionally stunted people and insecure people. They always want somebody to be in control. And it doesn't even have to be a good person. They just want somebody to be in control, and that is the thing with the right wing specifically. Also, emotionally stunted people are reactionary, but we're going to talk about that later. Now, so what happens with Hook in the original book is Hook is a lost boy that dares to grow up. And Peter doesn't like that, so he tries to kill him. He has an area where he takes them to murder them so they can't grow up. Because that's abandoning Peter, and Peter was abandoned as a kid. He didn't like that, and that's not happening again. Okay. because he has abandonment issues from being abandoned. Understanding this will enable you to understand how everybody at this church works. You could argue every church leader is a Peter Pan. So when Wendy gets there, she begins to give the boys kindness, and they mistake it for love. They think she's in love with her because they've never felt kindness, and kindness is a form of love. To which she explains basically she's just being a good person. And this results in the Lost Boys trying to be kind of decent people, but not really. The best decent person a kid can be. And Peter sees this as a threat. He's not okay with it because it's a change to his natural order, which is Peter's in control of everything. He says what's good and what's bad, and nobody approved this kindness shit to him. So he goes over and threatens Wendy, tells him, quit being nice, quit being a good person, I hate that, I need to be in control. And she's like, well, and she starts being nice to him, and then he goes, oh, this kindness stuff isn't that bad. But he doesn't want to be vulnerable. Yeah, because he's the leader, he's the big, strong man boy leader. So after a while, Peter starts fucking noticing the Lost Boys are all starting to kind of get away from him. They start thinking like, well, I guess like growing up isn't so bad if you get to fall in love with a lady and then have kids. And they start thinking Peter doesn't like that. He starts threatening all the Lost Boys, telling him he's going to kill them. And they start talking about getting women. He's the one that's allowed to have Wendy because he gets all the unconditional love he didn't get as a kid from her. She gives it to him. She's not getting, and then she starts crying, tells him she wants to go home to her family because she loves her family. She does not love him. And he has a moment where he takes his sword and he's about to fucking murder her because she told him, I don't love you. And then he has a slight change of heart and he basically takes her home to her family. Yeah. And when she gets there, he watches her and her family and how they're happy to see her and shit. And he doesn't say anything. He's apathetic about the whole thing. And the whole thing with Peter is all the other Lost Boys are willing to grow up. He's not. And he's in control and he's going to make sure nobody else grows up. In the story, they talk about how the Lost Boys just randomly go and murder pirates for no reason. They go and just terrorize people for no reason. And part of it's a control thing, and the other side of it is just making a nuisance of themselves because they have no values and they have no morals. Because they're kids, and they think like kids. Just like everybody in this church thinks like a 2-year-old. Yeah. I think Peter Pan is an allegory for fascism. And how fascism, everything is done under threat. And even in Peter Pan, he gets mad at the Lost Boys because they're supposed to imagine their foods and eat it. And when they get older, they lose their imagination. They use their childlike whimsy. And then they can't imagine their food, so they just starve to death at the table and die. And the correct thing to do, a real leader would just let that guy grow up. But Peter lets them die because he has to be in control. And he can't handle not being in control. He decides who lives and dies because he's appointed himself God because he had a horrible childhood and has control issues. This dynamic, there's a lot of psychology to this, and I am actually impressed that this book came from like the 1800s or whatever, but like this dynamic is weirdly in line with almost everything at this church. It is like as if somebody knew about this church and then wrote a book about it and how it actually works and just how everybody, the Lost Boys are all anxious and scared because whenever Peter talks to them, he has a fucking sword pointed at him, which is like a gun, which is what the sword represents is control and fear. Control through fear, which is what this church does. It is control through fear. Under the threat of death. Everything is under the threat of death. And Peter does everything under the threat of death because he does it all through force. He doesn't know any other way. He doesn't see any other way. He doesn't see a way where everything could be beneficial. He doesn't see a better world. He has no vision. He only wants mindless, stupid control. Mindless, stupid control. Yeah. And this, in a nutshell, is a big chunk of how the right wing thinks, and this does actually imply that every right winger is actually a child whose dad didn't love them, okay, or their moms didn't love them. Yeah. I'm not a pussy, so like that shit doesn't bother me none, but like it bothers these people, and I guarantee you right wingers are going to lie to your face and say I don't have daddy issues, I don't have problems, I just need to have a gun so I feel safe. And the issue with people who have control issues from being assaulted, traumatized, or raped, or exposed to the world in a negative fashion as a child, they have a negative standard for life. Everything's done through fear or anxiety or threats. And normal people don't do that. Like, there's compassion and kindness and all these other wonderful things people do. But these people only know one thing: force. I'm going to take it by force. I'm going to take it through some arbitrary shit. Now, dude, even the Anal Eating Mummy God, when he took George Miller's daughter, it was an act of spite, and he went out there to the desert to teach George Miller a lesson, to make sure this woman stayed out of his hands. But no matter how hard the president tried, he could not get her to stop loving her father and wanting to go home, and eventually even the president of this church began to feel horrible because she's been out there for 30, 40 fucking years, okay? Probably longer than that, 60 years. I don't know when their president was put in place. She's been taken away from her dad, and the president has had to deal with her screaming and wanting to go home forever. And it is the same thing with all the wives that are forced into the sex harem. They all hate their husbands. They don't want to be there, so they pop LSD, and then their husbands are like, I gotta keep you because you're pretty and people like you, and that means they like me because I don't know where I end and you begin, and you're mentally ill, dude. You're mentally ill. Okay? And you're immiserating everyone because you're mentally ill. And I remember this even when I was working at Papa John's. The two guys I was like working with, they were explaining to me, because they're emotionally stunted, and just like Peter Pan, they literally told me they're not gonna grow up. They told me I'm right about everything, but they're not gonna grow up. Because they were told being emotionally stunted is the superior psychology. Why would you develop? Why would you actually become a fully actualized, realized being when you can just be stupid your entire life? Why do you want to be in control then? Maybe you can just go be stupid somewhere else without ruining life for everybody. How's that sound? Nope. I want to be in control and I want to be stupid. That is literally the base response to me, as it was explained to me. So they're going to have miserable wives who hate them, who don't want to be with them, and they're going to go, this has to be this way because I said so, because I wanted it that way. And I don't care. And you're going to be like, great, yes, you're telling your wife you don't care about her feelings. You're telling your wife you don't care about how she feels. And you think that's a good idea because you think like a 2-year-old. And even the story with Wendy and Peter Pan. He wants to love, but he don't want to give nothing. There's no exchange here. It's going one way. He doesn't give a fuck. He doesn't give a shit. Threatening to kill her. You're going to love me or I'll kill you. That's how that works. This is the solution. And you're just like, in the book, you're like, he's a kid. But these are full-grown men going, I'm going to kill you if you're not my wife. Okay. This is how stupid people behave, but also, like, the other side to this church is there's a lot of incest, but the truth about incest with rich people is it keeps money in the family, and that's why they marry their cousins, is it makes sure their money, their wealth all stays where it's at. It's so it doesn't ever leave the family. That's why that happens. That's not really relevant to the story of Peter Pan, but the psychology is all there. Okay? And Peter Pan, in the modern day, he's this hero, he's this wonderful being, but I think I would love to see a real Peter Pan story done the way the book is done, because I think there would be a lot of people out there watching it and seeing how disgusting Peter is and then going, oh shit, that's me. That would be called enforced introspective. Enforced introspective. The War Boys in George Miller's movie reminded a bunch of the church members of themselves, and they left the church because they were so disgusted with how the War Boys made them feel. I thought the War Boys were awesome. I mean, I would never be that fucking stupid, but I thought they were cool. But The thing I'm getting at here is traumatize people, and this is just a religion of trauma. Yeah. It's a religion of death. Yeah.